Okay, welcome to today's free webinar, Sales Productivity Bootcamp, Strategies to Build Winning Teams, with Tony Hughes and Lindsay Brown. I'm Cameron Kaler, the Sales Development Manager here at CiTRİX, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about sales productivity and how to maximize sales results whilst minimizing the resources expended, such as cost, effort, and time. About 20% of your sales team are top performers who often meet or exceed quota, but that means leaves the majority of your sales team with room for improvement and opportunity to increase productivity. And this comes down to a couple of things: competency, cultural fit, equipping your sales team with the right tools, and developing the right cadence to ensure accountability. These are a few things to consider. So how do you go about approaching them? That's what we're here to explore today in this interview-style webinar. So it's great to see so many people joining us today. Looks like there's a few more coming on. So whilst we get settled, I'm just going to quickly run through some general webinar housekeeping before we get started. So because this is a public webinar, you've entered in listen-only mode, but that, of course, does not mean we don't want to hear from you. We're really keen for you to interact as much as possible with us today to maximize what you take away from today's webinar. So please feel free to send any questions as you think of them, and we'll get to them at the end in the Q&A. You can do this by using the questions panel on the questions pane on your control panel, which I'll be able to see and manage as they come in. And as I mentioned, we'll have some time at the end for a full Q&A to make sure we get as many answers across in today's webinar. If throughout the webinar you experience any issues with your internet connection or computer audio, do note the audio mode toggle on your control panel. Simply switch to telephone and the toll-free number, access code, and PIN will appear. And if you have any technical problems, do let me know by posting your issue in the questions pane, and I'll come to your assistance straight away. You're welcome to take notes during this webinar as always, but we'll provide you with a link at the end of the day with a recording of the session. So, with all the housekeeping out of the way, it's time to kick off today's webinar. One of the speakers joining me today is Tony Hughes. Tony is the Managing Director of RSVP Selling and author of the book, The Joshua Principle. He's on the cutting edge of complex enterprise selling and is regarded as a leader within the technology and software industries. Tony has taught for Sydney University and the University of Technology Sydney, and is an accomplished trainer, presenter, and public speaker, specializing in business communication, strategy, sales, negotiation, and leadership. So welcome to us, Tony. Our other speaker is CiTRİX. Cheers, Tony. Our other speaker is CiTRİX's very own VP of Sales here in APAC, Lindsay Brown. Since 2014, Lindsay has led the APAC business to be the fastest growing region globally for 2015. He has more than 19 years of sales and executive management experience, a Master's of Business Administration, and a successful track record in growing and scaling multinational companies. Welcome, Lindsay. Okay, so let's go.
Hey Cam, thanks so much for the introduction. I've done a few webinars with CiTRÍX and really good to be with you all today. I've actually got a little bit of a cold, so I'll certainly persist through and I'll try and mute if I need to cough. I just want to say at the outset that if you'd like to connect with me, a lot of what we're talking about today with Lindsay is the subject of various blogs that I've actually published, so please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and have a look at my blog content where you'll see the kinds of topics that we're talking about today. The thing I really love about today is this is not theories. We've got the opportunity to talk with one of the best sales leaders in the Asia-Pacific region, someone who's doing it in the real world and in markets that are tough. Certainly for CiTRÍX, parts of the solutions that they sell are becoming commoditized. So the ability for them to really lead with a good value narrative in what they're doing, to segment their markets effectively, is actually incredibly important. What I wanted to do today, just before we jump into the conversation with Lindsay, is really to frame what I see as some of the trends out there that make this conversation so important. Gartner, for example, believe that by 2020, which is actually not that far away, it's only a few years away, that 85% of business-to-business transactions out there in the world will actually be done without any human intervention. I'm going to talk in a moment about some additional research that's been done by Forrester Group which shows some disturbing trends for those in business-to-business field selling. But when you have a look at what other research is saying there, and that's that 85% of sellers fail to meet buyer expectations, it really is a sobering statistic. 95% of decision makers expect insight from the seller, but when people like Corporate Executive Board have done their research with buying organizations, they surveyed more than 5,000 buying organizations. The thing that they found was that 86% of people really fail to differentiate, and yet competitive differentiation is something that's incredibly important. Just the other dimension to this is that I'm going to show you in a moment a segmentation or a value quadrant illustration that talks about the different types of selling that's out there, and it's what I want to lead the conversation with Lindsay about in a few moments. But this is a summary of the research done by a gentleman called Andy Hoare from Forrester Group. This was published in April 2015, so it's very recent research. And again, they surveyed well over 200 buyers, and they really got deep with them about the way that they do market evaluation and procurement. And what Forrester concluded is that 22%, and in the USA that equates to more than 1 million salespeople, so business-to-business selling is the context in this particular stat, will lose their roles. Now, my view is that it's not that the number of employees that these organizations that are selling have employed is going to drop by that amount necessarily, but I think the role of field selling is really under pressure, and field sellers really do need to get good at creating the value that funds the role. Increasingly today, buyers aren't lonely and bored looking for a friend to call them up and try and build a relationship. For the seller, we see a lot of value in having a relationship with a potential buyer, because people do buy from those that they know, like, and trust. So we need to build that relationship and gain understanding about what they need. But from the seller's point of view, they don't see a value initially in the relationship. They see value in how you can solve their problems. So in this quadrant, you'll see that it's really only those sellers that can operate in that top right-hand corner, the ones that can adopt a truly consultative approach. They're the ones that will really do well in the future. So one of the things I think CiTRÍX have done incredibly well, obviously being led by Lindsay and the team there, is that they've really thought about how do they segment their markets. So if you look at the roles that are under pressure and where we need to change and adjust the way that we go to market, if something just is a transactional commodity, obviously the margins are thin, you've got to trade on volume, and buyers are very empowered. I think that, that business development hunter kind of salesperson has operated down in there for part of what they sell, and account managers will help people transact as well. But in moving to that top right-hand quadrant, the reality is the transactional commodity piece is becoming far larger, and it's really important for sales managers and for salespeople to make sure that those high-value sales resources in terms of people aren't trapped down there in the transactional section. So what I want to ask Lindsay in just a moment is, what has CiTRÍX really done in evaluating this and addressing it and adjusting the way that they go to market? So obviously what many companies or corporations will look at is really developing inside sales, getting marketing and sales to work more closely together to get web to lead, to use content marketing to attract and engage buyers earlier in the cycle. They'll try and move the people that are doing account management to greater value. They'll look at leveraging channels. And those hunter style of field salespeople, it's not a really good term, hunter. We don't want to go and treat people in the market as our prey. We're really trying to help people. It's one of the ironic things about selling is you constantly get rejected by people you're trying to help. But we need to help people move up to value. So what I wanted to do, just to really open this up, was get Lindsay just to give a little bit about his background. He does have several decades of experience in the real world of the coalface, really delivering. And Lindsay, what I'd like to do is just throw to you and ask you to talk about the challenges that you're facing in quite a competitive market and the strategies that you've adopted in terms of segmenting your business to make sure that you're engaging with your marketplace in the way that they want to, and that salespeople are creating the level of value that they need to fund their roles. So, Lindsay, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. Really appreciate it. It's interesting, right, because a lot of the challenges that you spoke of, we've had to go through over the past sort of couple of years since I've joined in 2014. And, you know, a lot of it's still ongoing. We're by no means through the journey, but I think we've made some good sort of starts on a number of fronts. If I think about what the reality is for our business, and probably for a lot of other businesses out there in the market as well, is that just the sheer fact that buyers these days have so much access to what market information is, what's available on the internet. You just don't know where, as a seller, where you're going to start that sales conversation. You might be starting with them, if you're lucky these days, right at the beginning, but a lot of the time it's in the middle or potentially even towards the end, where they've already formed a point of view around what they're potentially trying to solve for. And, you know, I think just based on what you said, the fact is we've got to get better at having a business conversation with these buyers, because they can self-serve. They can learn about our products online. They can learn about all the features and so on. And so we need to think about ways in which we can move up the value chain. You know, you spoke about salespeople, and the undeniable fact is that salespeople are expensive. They cost a lot of money. And for us, you know, the constant challenge is how can we move our sales force up the chain, still be able to have those value-based conversations. And one of my mandates, which I have to do, is I have to make sure that with our business, about 70% of our business now goes online, all right, because that allows us to manage a cost of sale. And also, in a sense, it means that we have to find a way for our salespeople to become those value champions and have those high-value conversations where we can drive larger deal sizes and, you know, still grow our business overall. So, you know, we've been fortunate. We're an Asia-Pac business. It's very much a growing market. But those challenges combined mean that we need to think about new ways in which we engage and segment our market and push sales up that value chain to make sure that they're having those insightful conversations, I think, as you put it, with buyers, so they're not speaking about products and features and so on.
Hey, Lindsay, I'm really intrigued by one of the things you've just said there, that you've moved about 70% of your business for people to transact online. But I know from previous conversations that we've had that you've had dramatic growth in the size of your sales team. So how do those two things correlate together?
It's a really interesting challenge, right? Like the brief I've had basically is we need to shift that business, but we need to still grow at the same time. So, you know, and the challenge there and to be able to do that has meant that we've really needed to enable the folks to understand how to manage themselves in terms of having those business conversations, how to manage their day, and also how to engage with the buyers in the right segments of the market to make sure they're having the right conversations with folks that are going to have a high probability to buy. So what that boils down for us is to really truly understand what our value proposition is, and we'll probably talk more about this as we go along, but understand where we fit in the market and then align our sales team to cover that, to make sure that we get not only growth through online, but there's also growth in the market which we're trying to tackle. And that simply just boils down to us really understanding who our customers are, where we've been successful in the past, and using that almost as a blueprint to be able to target new customers that look very similar to that profile, so we know that we're going to be successful as we move forwards.
Okay, so just to round out this part of the conversation, if you're happy to, could you just talk through the approach you took to segmentation? So I know for many of the organizations I work with, sometimes that's less complex. Other times it's a weird three-dimensional matrix thing that's very hard to crack between geographies, verticals, and then the types of solutions you're taking to market. So what was the process you went through in looking at the suite of solutions and offerings that CiTRİX is taking to market under you? How did you approach the problem of segmentation to decide where business belongs?
I mean, you're absolutely right, Tony. It can be something where it's really easy to get bogged down and almost overanalyze the situation, right? We've got a big market to tackle. We've got a lot of different cultures. You've got different growth segments across geographies and so on. The challenge for us really has been just thinking about how we're going to sequence that work and capitalize and prioritize on the opportunity that's available. So, you know, we really sort of looked at it in both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach. So, you know, firstly, what are the different markets that we know that we've been successful in so far, and do they still offer that growth opportunity for us? All right. I think a lot of people, whether they do business within Australia, New Zealand, or perhaps even more abroad, know that, especially when you're sort of looking at small business and mid-market, great opportunity with ANZ, and also an opportunity abroad in Asia as well. So for us, it was more of a case of not trying to do everything at once, but just pick one or two geographies where we know that we'd be quite successful, and that we had already people located in those regions, or otherwise could easily reach out into those regions from an inside sales perspective based on time zone, so they could go ahead and have those conversations. From there, I mean, we cover a whole lot of different verticals, and we also go from the top end of town all the way down to small business. And again, that's a huge market for us to cover and for us to consider. So what we've really thought about is, again, just really looking at the profile of customer that we've had success with in the past, and just understanding those characteristics of those organisations. How big are they? How do they usually make decisions when they're buying our products? Do they sit within a particular sort of vertical or not? And then just use those characteristics to go ahead and look at what the total market looks like as mapped against those particular profiles, and use that as a means to go ahead and start creating territories and having salespeople aligned to those. So in that sense, it is really straightforward and it simplifies the problem. But my guidance, and I think the takeaway from a lot of this, is don't try and over-engineer it. Really try and sequence that work, and work on the first little piece of opportunity, and know that you've probably got another 5 or 6 opportunities down the track, but just don't try and do it all at once.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people fail to consider the lifetime value of a customer, and that's especially important with cloud-based solutions today for technology companies like yourself, where customers can start really affordably. There's no big financial reward for the selling organization in those initial transactions typically, so they need to become a long-term customer for it to be mutually beneficial. So look, I think there's some great wisdom there for everybody listening to this. So okay, look, what I'd like to move into is that, one of the things I believe really strongly is that the biggest point of risk for an organization and for a sales manager is hiring the wrong person. If you hire the wrong person, if they were carrying, say, a $2 million target in an organization and they're the wrong person, they're going to probably end up costing you $1 million of lost revenue. They damage the brand of the organization. They damage the personal brand of the sales manager that's trying to manage them. They chew up huge amounts of time. So a mishire is a really important thing when we're looking at this concept of a sales productivity bootcamp. We want to avoid mishires. So what I'd love to hear from you is, what's your approach for hiring the right people, and what do you really look for in a good, modern, successful salesperson today?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? And you're absolutely right. It just costs an absolute bomb, and we're by no means perfect. We've done mishiring and all that kind of stuff, and that's where I think a lot of folks on the webinar as well know just how much it hits home when you get that piece wrong. For us, I think there's a few things you can do to try and cover for that risk. I think it really starts with almost a few of the previous comments I made about being really clear on what your strategy is as a sales organization, and understanding, in a sense, what are the territories and types of customers or prospective customers you're going to cover, and where do you have selling success? Is it at the high end? Is it in the mid-market, small business, or what have you? And also understanding things like, what is the average type of deal? How big is that deal? Who usually makes those decisions within the customer organization when they're making those buying decisions? All right, how long is the sales cycle that a salesperson needs to contend with? All these things allow you to build, in a sense, again, a profile of what a successful salesperson might look like within your organization. Because I think what that does is, if you understand what your strategy is, that's going to help you understand, well, what are the specific competencies I need to look for in prospective salespeople as I'm going through the hiring process. Like if I look at our business, I spoke about, and I think you said it as well, we've had a huge amount of growth within our business, all right? 50% year-on-year growth, it doesn't happen that often, and we've been really fortunate to be able to double the sales headcount within region here. And so we've just been going through a really rapid hiring ramp on this. And for us to cover that risk, we've really thought about, what do we need to do strategically to cover our market, and what's the type of selling that we need to do? And in our sense, what we've got to do is we're big on customer acquisition, all right? So immediately I've got to think, well, what is the sales activity and the competency I need in salespeople to be able to do that successfully? And that just boils down to, a couple of things, but something as simple as them being able to prospect and have business conversations into the right level of organisation. Our sweet spot's mid-market, right? So you're going to get decision makers there that wear multiple hats. You know, they might be the CEO one day and they might be the CFO the next day. So I need people that are comfortable getting on the phone. They know how to develop business and have a business conversation, and they need to be able to work with someone that has that dual sort of role or multiple roles in terms of running a business and also being into it day to day. And so just by knowing that and specifically interviewing around those particular areas is really helpful for us. I always try and think away from hypotheticals when we're doing interviews. So I think simple things like having what we call behavioural-based questions really help. So when you're interviewing someone, having that profile in mind and actually saying to them, in your current role or in your previous role, actually talk me through the situation, the task that you had, and then how you had to accomplish that task and the results that it produced. So you know that the salesperson is not making it up. Really go deep with them and understand the real situation that they've had to go through to demonstrate the competency in those areas you're trying to hire for. You know, it really does help, and it allows you to weed out who actually is, I guess, you know, making it up as they go along in that sales interview versus who really knows their stuff.
There's a couple of really good things I heard there. So I love the concept of benchmarking what a great person looks like, I guess, you know, personality, activity, operating style, knowledge-wise. So what does a great successful seller look like, and then use that as a benchmark in the way you're profiling and looking. And then I love the approach of competency-based interviews. Really, really important. Just to wrap up this piece of the conversation, talk me through your views about references. I know that for many employers, they'll use references as a tick-the-box thing at the end. I know for myself, I'm working with, so I'm on on the boards of a few companies, and I help clients hire, but I actually really recommend that they use references earlier in the process, not just as a validation. And every salesperson will have a list of people they say are their referees, but they're usually well-coached people, do a good job for them. I actually say, you as the employer, you go pick the referees. When they talk about these opportunities they won, ask them, would you be okay if that person you sold to would be a reference for you in this process? But that's a little provocative. What's your approach to the thing of references?
Yeah. Look, I come from a very similar school around those sort of suggestions you made, Tony. You know, I've also taken a leaf out of the top grading book, which was part of the hiring methodology that Jack Welch used to do out of GE, and a lot of that was around understanding who the referees are, or even asking during the interview, you know, who are you going to recommend as your referee? And then getting that actual name, and either then taking the check or otherwise using that name continually throughout the process and saying, well, okay, so Cameron, your referee, what would he say about you in this situation? So always using that name and having them know in the back of their head, especially if you've done that reference early, it really sends a clear message to that potential candidate that you've taken that particular reference already, you've had that conversation, and you're trying to check the validity through that question and actually mentioning that name. So I think that's a really good way to test the authenticity of answers, and doing it in a continual fashion throughout the process. I think you also mentioned corporate executive board as well. We use our profiling and we do psychometrics as part of that early in the process as well, just to sort of make sure that we understand what the motivators are and where they might be strong or weak or otherwise based on what our sales process is, because you can customize these different sort of profiling tests to make sure you've got a good fit for your organization.
Well, that's an incredibly mature approach, right? So, yeah, the CEB research stuff is really good around the sort of challenger persona. Not that that's the be-all and end-all, but yeah, so that's really good advice. Okay, let's move on and talk about the fact that you've done a good job in screening out the wrong people to hire. You've benchmarked well on what a successful person will look like. You've done a thorough and rigorous process to hire them. And by the way, I love the fact that you do this, because I often say to people that the manner in which a potential employer will go through that hiring process with you is very indicative of how they're going to support you once you're on board. So if they don't have their act together in how they hire you, they probably don't have their act together in helping you be successful when you start. Now, you clearly do, and you've had phenomenal growth. What's some wisdom you can share with people that are on the webinar today about how you ramp new sellers?
Yeah, I think it's really important, right? And I think consistency in the experience. I mean, I'm not sharing anything new here, but on the first day that the sales rep hits the desk, all right, they want to know, have they made the right decision in joining the organisation? And they're going to repeatedly ask themselves that question for the first 30 days, if not the first 90 days that they're within the new organisation that they're working for. I mean, these days, as you know, when you're going through hiring, if you're getting a really good salesperson, you've got that constant back and forth evaluation during the hiring process and then post-hiring process as well. So that first 90 days is critical. All right, and so we've done a lot of work within region here and also corporately to make sure that our hiring and our onboarding is consistent and that we really give folks the best chance that they can have to be successful within those first 90 days. So, it's not necessarily new wisdom, but I think the fact of going through the hard work and having things like 30, 60, 90-day milestones in place is really important. All right. What does the first 30 days look like? And, having a conversation with the person so they can weigh in on that as well. What do you think the first 30 days looks like to be successful? How would you like to take yourself over the next sort of ensuing 30 days from there and there till you hit that 90 days and know that you've had a really successful onboarding? All right. So I think having a plan in mind and understanding what the different gates are for success are really important. And that can range from competency in being able to use systems and tools, understanding the sales methodology, all the way through to, getting that first sale done as soon as you can, for instance. We do other things at a corporate level, for instance. We have our own sort of methodology and approach that we have for selling. We have an onboarding program where we actually send our new sales reps across to the US to go through their induction. They learn about product. They learn about our sales methodology and conversations. We just really make sure that they have a nice, consistent process in place to know that and help them feel that they've made the right decision. The other thing to keep in mind as well is we try and keep things quite simple. We don't overload people with a lot of pressure. We give them what's called a ramp period. There's no quota for the first month, for instance. All right, and we just try and teach them how can they sell one of our solutions rather than all, sort of 10 or 12 of them. How can they sell one really well and then gradually add that complexity in? So I think that the key takeaway is just have a process around how you onboard people and have, really think about that sort of 30, 60, 90 and what makes sense to your organisation to really gate that success.
Are you happy to talk through the balance between equipping people to have the right sort of conversations as they go to sell and equipping them with tools to help them be productive and effective out there in the marketplace? Because in my view, it tends to typically be about both. They've got to be able to carry the right conversation, but they've also got to be able to be very efficient in how they go and sell. Because the reality for many sellers today is that the quarterly or annual quotas or targets that they're being allocated are going up. It's just the reality of life. And often average transaction size tends to be shrinking at the same time, and they can easily just run out of hours in the day to go be successful. So can you talk through that other dimension around tools as well to help them be effective?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because when we think about tools for us, we're an inside sales organisation, so the means by which we get coverage is basically by using the telephone or otherwise a similar experience to this where we can sell face-to-face but otherwise conquer the barrier of distance in terms of using things like, web conferencing technology and so on. So we can engage early, we can get across any barriers of, body language and so on to know that we're engaging in the right ways. But there's other soft tools as well, like you spoke about conversation and soft skills and all that sort of thing. Tremendously important, right? You can teach, and plenty of salespeople, even in an interview, will talk about how they've been taught about spin selling and various other methodologies to have that value conversation. But having a business conversation doesn't make it compelling. All right, and I think what the real important thing is to make that conversation valuable in the customer's eyes is have that business conversation. Yes, train the reps on how they can learn about spin and all that kind of stuff, but get together internally and cross-functionally and define what your sales conversation looks like on a persona and also in a sales process sense. So really tailor what those conversations look like. And again, it's much going back to your existing customer base and understanding where you've been successful so you can tailor those conversations so you've got both the tool of the sales methodology, as you put it, to know that you're following the right process, but then the soft skills tools as well to say that you're having the right compelling conversations, and you make sure that you're effective in those, in those first few months of selling. So I think that's really important. And then, for us, we are high volume, so being able to leverage those tools and be able to work on the telephone or web conference is absolutely critical for success.
Yeah, and if you're happy to, what's your view about things like CRM and things like LinkedIn for people being effective?
CRM for me is a little bit of a misnomer, right? I think Salesforce automation is probably the better word, simply because it allows you to, you can't manage your, no one's got control over revenue. I wish I did, right? I could press a magic button and then suddenly the quota is achieved and we're all happy, right? I go on a holiday. But you can't do that. I think what you can do, bud, is you can think about what are your sales objectives. So I spoke about, for us, growth through new customers is critically important. All right, so I can map that back then to, well, what's the activity that needs to happen from there? All right, so it's like, okay, we need to look at customers or prospects that are similar to customers that we've had success with in the past. And so then I can align the sales organization into prospecting activity against those customers, and I can use the Salesforce automation tool to help me go ahead and, measure that activity. That's where I can exert control. Similar to LinkedIn, right? You can't sell in LinkedIn. It's about building your profile. It's about getting your name and so on in the market, so you can act as an influencer, that when you make that call to that customer, they know that you're of value, right? You're providing insight. So understanding what the business value is and getting that out there into the market through your network, something like this, is absolutely critical. But I think sometimes people mistake social selling with selling, and it's just not the case, right? You use that as a tool to be able to get your personal brand in the market, and your personal brand is you as an influencer and a business leader.
I love all of that. I think it's right on the money. Just for all of those listening to the webinar, there's an excellent book I'd encourage you to read that is really consistent with what Lindsay's just talked about, and it's a book by Jason Jordan. He's the co-author with Michelle, but the name of the book is Cracking the Sales Management Code. And Jason makes the very valid point, the same as Lindsay's just made, in that we cannot manage results. You can't pull a revenue lever. We can only manage the activities that feed into sales objectives that then in turn will go and create that revenue result for us. Lindsay, if you're happy to, I wouldn't mind just asking a bit of a follow-up question to what you've been talking about. And just to frame it, a lot of the companies I work with, and sad to say, especially a lot of North American companies, towards the end of their month, quarter, or financial year, they go crazy on this concept of cadence calls. And what I see is they're calls that add almost no value at all to the salesperson. They're not really coaching calls. They're just calls that plow over the same old ground. And people often say, well, nothing's changed since we did the cadence call yesterday. But the negative impact of a lot of cadence I see in organizations is inappropriate pressure on the salesperson, and an immature salesperson can go and either do one of two things with their prospective client. They can permanently lower the price point because they'll offer some discount if you buy tomorrow, even when the person is in no position to buy, but they'll hold on to that discounted price in their own mind and get very upset if it's taken away. Or they end up damaging the relationship by putting pressure on someone who's just unable to go ahead at the moment because they don't understand the buyer's process. So what's your view to creating good, healthy rhythm and cadence over those activities? Obviously we've all got to deliver revenue, but what's your view in balancing those two things together?
It's a couple of things, right? And it's sort of like a two-part answer, I think. There's like the within sales rhythm and the cadence there, especially when it comes to closing that you mentioned. And then there's the overall activity piece, right? I don't remember where this quote came from, but it's something along the lines of, if you're, persistency will get you there and consistency will keep you there. All right, and I think just having a rhythm as a business overall and educating the reps in terms of what makes a successful quarter is really important. And you can break that down into activity, bucket things in terms of, where your pipeline might sit in terms of deal size and so on, to help reps really understand, well, what sort of coverage do I need on my quota, and then help them reverse engineer that back into the activity I need to perform personally as a rep to be able to reach those goals. Because the day or the week that you miss in terms of doing your activity is the pipeline that's not generated in 3 weeks' time, which means you won't be able to close business at the end of that month, for instance. All right, and people don't realise that gap until that future point where they don't have anything that they can close on. So I think just generally understanding things, like I said before, what is your sales cycle? What is the velocity of a sale, and how long does it take to have that value conversation is really important. So then reps and sales managers can really understand what is the path to quota. All right, because it allows you then to control that activity, as you said. Then when it comes to things like end of quarter, and sort of on the initial point of your question, how can you control that sales cycle? I think that boils down to if you've had a valuable conversation, a business conversation with the customer, and you can reach an agreement with them in terms of understanding and documenting with them what their buying process is, you can come up with them and say, well, this is the project plan that you and I are going to work with prospective customer to get the deal closed. All right. So what is that buying process? How do you get legal involved? We know what conversations need to happen, finance and so on to get it done. So, we call it a milestone plan, but there's plenty of other words for it. But just having those close plans in place really helps get those deals closed, or at least adds more predictability around what end of quarter is going to look like.
Yeah, Lindsay, I really love the way you think, and for everybody on this webinar, really important to understand that closing a deal should never be some white-knuckle roller coaster ride where we're hoping. We should treat closing as just the next logical step in the process. So, Lindsay, your comments about the fact that you prefer to use the term Salesforce automation than CRM software, customer relationship management software, and I really agree with this, because in its worst form, CRM simply becomes a database and a tool for people to manage up that nobody particularly trusts, right? Whereas if you've implemented a CRM system in a way that automates the sales process, so in essence you're playbooking the way people sell, you've identified buyer's journey and mapped your sales process to buyer's journey, you've got stages, you've got prompts and questions and collateral and case studies to support people through all of that process, then that's really how you make selling a process rather than some sort of dark art. So I agree with you completely. And then the other thing I think for people listening to this that you can take away from what Lindsay has just said is you need to take that through to the way that you manage the salesperson's success themselves, as a sales manager. So I think all of that is just gold for people. Really valuable listening to someone who's doing this today in the real world, not, rather than some sort of consultant. So I just want to change gears. Let's have a talk about sales targets and compensation plans, because there's a really scary number. It depends on whether it's TAS, or other people that have done research, but depending on the research you look at, somewhere between 40% to 2/3 of business-to-business salespeople miss their number. There's certainly plenty of salespeople feel that maybe their target isn't achievable. So what's your approach to designing sales targets and compensation plans? You've alluded to this really well through the onboarding process, but how do you and CiTRịX approach that? Because it's so important that people believe they're set up for success and they've got a goal that they can go and hit, yeah?
Absolutely. Look, I've worked for plenty of different sort of software organisations, right? And I've seen this process completely overcomplicated in so many organisations. You see things like thresholds in place, or you've got to sell. I think this is one of the worst ones, right? You've got product gates in place. You've got to sell, X amount of product before you can actually get into an accelerator or otherwise actually get paid any money. All right, and if you're doing multi-product solutions, it force-fits the conversation with the prospective clients that you're trying to chase, and it really just erodes your ability as a salesperson to be successful. But perhaps even more importantly, it just completely diminishes any opportunity for you as a sales rep to have a business conversation, because you've always got in the back of your mind, I've got to take this customer down this path so they can buy this particular product so I can get paid. All right, so I think the guidance on this is what are the outcomes and behaviours you want to drive, and then also keep it really simple. All right, I want to hire a sales rep that is just as much confident as they are financially motivated to succeed. All right, if they're hungry, you've got someone there that's really going to work hard for you, right? And I think it comes down to that commitment and that financial incentive. And I love it when if I'm doing an interview, someone asks me about the comp plan. All right. And by the way, we're hiring at the moment. We have uncapped commission plans, and we pay accelerators on new customers. All right. New customers brought in the door will pay actually 3 times as much as what we would for someone selling to an existing customer. And I think that's just a great example of what we're trying to achieve in terms of the behaviour. We want to capture new market. We want to continue to grow as a business, sell to new customers, and we'll reward you for that. It's uncapped. It's really easy to understand. And I just think that's the formula for comp plans, right? I always see red flags when it's like you've got these different gates and thresholds and whatever. It should be easy and know the direction.
And Lindsay, the thing I love about what you just said too is that, I've always believed that the key lead indicator for a healthy business is the rate at which they can win and successfully onboard brand new named accounts, right? And you recognise that, you've got a simple metric in place that that actually rewards it. So, hey, I just want to change gear because I'm just conscious of time. We want to make sure that we've got time for some Q&A. I'm sure there's lots of people out there that will want to ask some questions. So, what are the most common mistakes that you see salespeople make?
And sometimes it's not the salesperson's fault. I should say that as well, right? I think the obvious stuff we spoke about is not necessarily being a business consultant, all right? And so just not getting yourself at the right level in the organisation to have that business conversation. Like, you may as well speak French to a user, right? Because if you're trying to talk to them about, cash flow or the cost of doing business, and they're interested in all the bits and bobs of what your product does, then you're going to sound really foreign to them. And it's the flip side as well, right? You don't want to talk to a decision maker about the features of your product because they'll lose focus straight away. They're worried about their business, profitability, growth, market share, that sort of thing. All right? So I think cross-functionally within a business, especially a sales and marketing organisation, there's got to be alignment there. So when new product features come out, we're educating the sales rep around the application and how that drives the business outcome, rather than, hey, we've just added this wonderful new webcam feature that allows us to speak in high def, right? That's not going to resonate with a sales leader. But then if we had a sales rep, for instance, say, well, we want to allow you to assess body language and be accurate in the sales conversation that you're having and know how to adjust on the fly, then that's great, because that maps perfectly to you and I have a conversation as we are at the moment, and using webcams. All right? So I think that alignment internally and how you position things and enable the sales reps is really important to know that they can then go out to market and have those business conversations. So a lot of the time I think those common mistakes can come from misalignment internally. And as well as just not doing the things that we spoke about, right? Poor onboarding, not caring for the sales rep and giving them the support they need in those early times to get to where they need to be, and not holding them accountable to that rhythm, building pipeline, doing that prospect, all those sort of basic things are what drives great outcomes.
Lindsay, this actually leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about anyway, which is the concept of getting the salesperson focused on why the conversation should matter for their potential client, getting them focused on business value. It must be tough for you as an organisation. I've worked in the technology industry myself for decades, and the thing I've always found is that technology companies, have got a raft of things they're trying to impart into salespeople, all this information about features, functions, solutions, complex pricing. When they're onboarded, there's so much they need to know about the product to be able to go out into the market and in their minds be credible. But how do you then flick that switch in your own organisation to get them to park all of that indoctrination they've had about the complexity of what they're selling people and just go focus on the business value for the buyer?
Look, it's really hard, right? And we don't certainly operate in a perfect world here within CiTRＩX either, right? Because we do have the issue of our product and our research and development teams going ahead and releasing, here's what the next thing is, and here's all the different features and so on. And, for us, there is still admittedly that misalignment between what the sales conversation should be versus what's being released to market in terms of features and so on. So for us, how we get around it is, one thing we've done is we've really tailored our sales process, all right? So when we enable our sales folks, we give them what we call value conversation cards, so they know if they're addressing, for instance, how to handle customer retention and satisfaction within an organisation, then we give them that particular question framework that they can then go ahead and speak with the support manager, for instance, within an organisation, and sort of express those questions and exude value. So that's part of our training and our enablement to make sure they have those value conversations. And then we drive that consistency by doing regular things internally, like opportunity reviews. All right, so mid-cycle we get together on various opportunities throughout the week as sales teams and make sure that we're looking at what is the value that's being provided to the particular customer. What is the pain? what is the after scenario that's going to drive that positive business outcome? How do we do it, and how do we do it better to map to that particular problem through our solutions?
Wow, that's incredible. I actually did a webinar myself a while ago that I thought was pretty provocative, but my hypothesis was that sales management is the weak link in the revenue chain. That's certainly not the case in your organization. Again, I just encourage people listening to this. On this webinar, there's some real gold in here that, that you can really benefit from. So it's the sales leadership inside the organization that drives that cadence, that keeps people focused, the coaches, that really makes the difference. So we're nearly at the end of this. I just got another question now about trust. So, I believe that selling is about the exchange of value. I've heard someone previously say that selling is about the exchange of trust. I think trust is the thing that determines the speed at which we can do business and the likelihood of being successful, but it's really the exchange of value. What's your approach to helping your sellers build trust with their buyers as quickly as possible? You kind of alluded to this, but what's your view on that?
Look, I think it boils down to two fundamental things, right? You sort of put it in a bucket of association and also what we call awareness. All right. So, people, the trust is, it can be transferred. If I know someone who you know, then it's easier for you to trust me. All right. So if I wanted to have a conversation with you and I didn't know you, but I said, oh, hey, I know I've been speaking to Cameron and you know Cameron really well, then at least you're probably going to give me an audience for about a couple of minutes to see what I've got to say. All right. So I think that association is really great. And a means by which you can do that is just enable your reps to make prospecting calls into different parts of an organization, different departments and so on, and ask questions. All right, because then you can use that research information to call on that decision maker and say, hey, I was talking to Jill in finance and she spoke about how you're having problems around doing, recovery of dollars at the moment in terms of your billing and so on. We've worked with other customers that sit within that industry and, here they are, ABC organisation and so on, and we've helped them do that. Are you open to a 5-minute conversation to understand if I might be able to help you? All right. So the second thing I demonstrated there was the awareness piece. All right. So by association, you can get that trust, and then through the awareness of saying, well, we've been successful with your industry peers as well, and here's how we've done that through customer success. They're the two things I think which are really good around sort of building that initial trust and that permission to engage. From there, it's over to the sales rep, right? They're the custodian of being the business professional, and that's where our ongoing training comes in to make sure that they're having those business conversations, because trust is an ongoing process, as you know. But I think that initial establishment is probably the hardest thing, right? And so I always say that thinking about how you can associate and then also create that awareness is really key.
Wow. Yep, I certainly agree with all of that. Let's move to the last piece now before we go to Q&A. So just encourage people, as you've been listening and taking notes, if you've thought of some questions to ask, please use that panel that Cam showed earlier and start to put some questions in. So we'll throw to Cam after this next slide and we'll get into Q&A. So I just wanted to really tie a bow around all of this at the end and just really talk about how do you bring it all together. So you've talked about having a sales methodology. You've got a process, obviously for onboarding salespeople, but also a process of aligning to buyer's journey and supporting them to help them become a customer. And then there's the issue of technology and tools to help people be productive. In your mind, and the slide gives the clue anyway around coaching, but can you just talk through how you bring all of these elements together and what you specifically do with your sales management team that reports in up to you to make sure that you get a really cohesive strategy that's executed well?
I mean it's as simple as and complicated as that, Tony, right? I think that the answer is simple but really hard to implement, right? It boils down to, I think, the lack of investment into sales management, which can be the fall down on this sometimes. But your sales leaders within your organisation is where it starts and where it stops. All right. I think there's plenty of sort of research and books out there that say if your sales managers aren't spending 50% or more of their time coaching sales reps, then they're not doing their job. All right. And so that centerpiece around coaching is absolutely critical. I mean, we spoke about the other stuff, right? The strategy is around your coverage. How are you going to align yourself to the market? The process is tailor your sales process around the customer conversations which meet those buying personas where you've had success in the past. The tools and the technology, Salesforce automation, and then for us it's to drive volume through engagement using tools like this so we can increase the number of sales calls we make, but have that face-to-face engagement and not worry about the barrier of distance.
So can I just ask you a question on that? Because I agree 100% with what you're saying. The thing I find in many organizations is that sales managers are spread thin. So there's more and more people reporting up to sales managers, and they're under enormous pressure to keep managing up. You know, they had these endless requests thrown at them, endless reports they're meant to run and do commentary on, and all of this unhealthy cadence behavior. If they manage to protect their sales reps from it, they certainly get sucked into that vortex themselves with people above. So what do you do at CiTRX to make sure that they focus on the important, which is investing time with their people and coaching, versus the myriad of urgent things that interrupt their day constantly?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's almost like, can I plug in a sales manager here to answer the question for you to keep me honest, right? But I try to also make sure that I've got a reasonable rhythm with my leadership team to keep them informed, but otherwise free to do the work they need to do. All right. So, you know, our rhythm as a leadership team is pretty straightforward, right? You know, I make sure that we catch up on a Monday morning. It's a quick huddle. Usually lasts for about 15 minutes, half an hour. We then go ahead and we do our forecast calls. Again, I don't have everyone in the room. We probably spend half an hour on a Tuesday doing that. All right. In my time, it's a lot more, but for a sales manager, it's really quick. Then every other week, we do a bi-weekly staff meeting, which might go for a couple of hours. I do one-on-ones every week with sales managers, but again, it only goes for about 15 minutes, half an hour. That's our rhythm. So my request of leaders really sort of boils down to, you know, at the worst case, it might be sort of, you know, 2 to 3 hours a week. All right. But every other week, it probably boils down to less than an hour. All right. Because, you know, again, I'm a true believer in making sure that their time is spent in terms of doing that work that they're doing there. We do other things like, you know, I spoke about a whole lot of stuff around onboarding, coaching, and so on. We certify our managers around that to make sure that they're doing the right things and spending the right time in the right places. Again, you know, it's one thing to certify, but then it's another thing to hold people accountable to that. So we're by no means perfect, but I think just really breaking down the week and what it looks like in terms of not only what it needs to be a successful sales rep, but then also what it needs to be a successful sales leader as well is really important, and then respecting that as a leader.
Wow. That's absolutely brilliant. So I'm sure everybody's taken a lot of really valuable information out of this. Well, more than information, I think it's wisdom from the real world and the coalface. So with that, Lindsay, what I'd like to do is I'll just hand back to Cam. He's obviously been having questions come in, so we'll hand back over to you, and we've got the Q&A section now.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Tony. And Lindsay, thanks again for sharing all of your insights and expertise. I'm sure everyone on the webinar here learnt quite a bit. As Tony mentioned, we've got a bit of time now for some questions, so please keep typing them in as you have been throughout the webinar. So look, the first one here comes from Sesha. It was a little bit earlier in the piece there, and this is directed to you, Lindsay. What is the timeline you would give to the new sales team to prove their capability as the sales cycle now takes a longer time? As the customer initiates the requirement and then parks it for an unknown time. So, I mean, I guess to rephrase it, you know, how long do you give them to prove their worth?
How's that? I'm live? Excellent. All right. So great question. Thank you for asking. My response was just around, similar to what I said before, right? You need to know how long a typical sales cycle sort of needs to last for, and you can apply that to your organization. You know, what it really boils down to is, you know, especially when you're onboarding, I think you need to offer that flexibility and ramp period. So we don't expect reps to be fully productive until they're at least had a quarter under their belt in terms of experience. So we don't apply quota for that first month so they can concentrate on being enabled and being ready. And then what we do is we ramp in quota, so we don't apply full quota until they've really hit that fourth month within the business, and we know that they've successfully met those gates which are required for the onboarding that we provide. Then we know that they're at a point where they can be successful and start selling. But, you know, our quotas and all that sort of thing is really built around what we understand in terms of our average deal size, our deal velocity, and so on. So then we know that we're applying quotas that, you know, they're a stretch, but otherwise they're achievable.
Okay, great answer, Lindsay. We've got another one come in here from John. What are some tools to refocus and remotivate a sales team that's been left to their own devices for too long? So great question there, John. I'd like to throw that one to Lindsay first, but also Tony. Keen to hear your take on that one as well.
So there's a whole lot of things I think you can do here, but I'll probably just mention one thing that we do here, which I think is quite helpful. So there's obviously the motivation and recognition that people get when they close a sale, all right? And then there's the ongoing and sort of sustaining in terms of recognizing different things, especially, we spoke about pulling that magic lever, and you can't do that for revenue, for instance, but you can recognize the activity which is going to lead to that outcome. All right, so what we have within the business here is we almost have it's like a loyalty program, and you can think of points that get rewarded to people, and they can go spend that on a website, and they can claim things like holidays, trips, iPhones, all that kind of stuff. And what we do is we use that as incentive to go ahead and recognize and reinforce the right behaviors and activities to make sure that reps are doing the right things. All right, so if the flavor of the month is around prospecting, then a number of accounts where new doors are opened, not necessarily sold into, we would reward points for that outcome.
And my piece to add to this is, so I agree with that. The other thing is, if you've got a sales organisation where kind of the inmates are running the asylum or they've been left to their own devices, the important thing to understand is that salespeople, by definition, are fairly strong-willed people typically that have their own opinions, the way things should be done. And the reality is, if you want to change behavior in a sales team, it's one of the hardest things that you'll face inside an organization. We need to recognize that people are motivated for reasons that they themselves discover. That's true for salespeople as they go and sell to people, but it's also true for management as they try and help salespeople evolve to where they need to be. So I believe great sales managers spoon feed their salespeople not with pipeline, but with books to read. So I think there's some great books that you can get people to read that start to help them reframe the way that they're executing their role. Because the reality is, if field salespeople, business-to-business salespeople don't change and adapt, if they don't extend their reach, become more efficient, change the kinds of conversations that they're having, learn to lead with why it should matter to the prospect instead of talking about themselves and their product, if they don't make those transitions, they'll be part of the up to a quarter of salespeople that will just lose their roles as companies are forced to change the model. So I would get people reading as my advice.
Okay, great two angles on that, Lindsay and Tony. I'm sure that hopefully that answered the question well for you there, John. It's just shot back that, yeah, thanks very much, guys. All right, I've got a question here from Simon. I know we went over it a little bit at the beginning, but I guess we want a little bit more depth. Onboarding is one thing, but it's more important to get the right fit. How do you select the right people and then check in with them? So I might throw that to you, Lindsay.
Sure. So if I do the back end of that question first, I think it's just as simple as making sure that you understand what makes success in the first place, all right? And so understanding what is a first successful 90 days and building that into your onboarding and your 90-day plan. I think it's simple as that. When you're looking at fit, I think you've got to look at your organisation overall and be really, really specific around what are the right sales behaviours, but then also what are the right behaviours that fit your organisation, all right? And that boils down to values. All right, our values are really straightforward. We think about things in terms of, being simple, being bold, being passionate, and they help us define during the hiring process the type of individual and the personality we're after. So I think just having a good values definition and understanding the behaviours behind that will allow you to pick that up during the interview process. Because as you know, if you do that post-interview or otherwise the candidate's on board and they're outside the values, it's a costly mistake.
Yeah, and the thing that I would add to this is that Lindsay's right on the money in that it's intelligence, personality, and values. A lot of people talk about cultural fit, but to me, culture is nothing more, nothing less than the behaviours of the leaders inside a business or of the people within that team. So Lindsay obviously focuses a lot, for those on this webinar, he focuses a lot on establishing a person's values before he brings them in, and that heads off at the pass a lot of the risk that employers typically have when they hire salespeople, because salespeople are good at selling themselves, they can project a persona, but it's their values that will cause us later on to decide this person's not a cultural fit and we have to manage them out. And for me, if you've got an underperforming salesperson or sales team, there's 4 things you ask yourself about. an individual or a team, and that is, are they competent? Are they committed? Are they a good cultural fit? That's their values and the way they behave. And then are they performing? And if the answer to any two of those four questions is no, then they probably need to be moved on. It's one of the biggest mistakes the sales managers make, is they're very reluctant to face that awful truth that this person just isn't a good fit and they need to be moved on.
Yeah, great answer there, Tony. And for those who have remembered our past webinars, I think it was Jack Daly that said you should hire slowly and fire quickly, which was something that I remember and taking on board. All right, we've got a question here from Chris, and I'm gonna throw this to you, Lindsay, and then obviously Tony would love to hear your thoughts on it as well. How do you get new salespeople to understand their influence in the business, not just in terms of sales, but also strategy and alignment? So, Lindsay, what was your thoughts on that?
So a couple of things, right? We make a monthly habit of doing an APAC-wide all-hands. And what we do in that is we actually get people to present the strategy of the business. All right. At the moment, because we've just redone our strategy, we're getting leaders within the business to go ahead and not present the whole strategy, but just pick a component of that and then go ahead and, retell it in their own way, perhaps wrap a story around it, and, make it live for people. So I think that's really important. So, it depends what you're trying to get that new person to understand, whether it's the corporate side of the strategy, the regional strategy, or perhaps even some sort of account strategy. But there's plenty of things. That's just one sort of conceptual example of where you can just throw a new person in and get them to either present a particular aspect of the business, whether it's within a team meeting or some other environment, so they can feel more ingrained, and then also build out their understanding in terms of, what they know of the business, but also establish themselves and get some credibility. All right. I think there's nothing more better than in terms of getting personal credibility than doing a presentation on a particular topic and doing that in front of your peers, because I think everyone knows that's probably the hardest thing to do, right, is get up in front of your peers and be vulnerable and make that presentation.
And I'd like to add to that. I want to take something Lindsay said earlier, which is the best way to be able to hire salespeople well is to know what a great, successful salesperson really looks like across a couple of dimensions. The way salespeople can become massively influential in the success of their own organization is for them to go and understand why the best customers they've got out there in the marketplace went to market in the first place. A lot of salespeople will go and have lunch or coffee with an existing client, and they'll want to understand, why did you buy from us over the competition? That's kind of interesting, but it's not very powerful. The thing that's really powerful is to ask the customer, what happened inside your organization that caused you to think that you needed to do something in this area at all? And if you can understand that really well, it helps you as an organization identify trigger events that build pipeline and build reasons, create reasons to go and engage with people early in the marketplace. So salespeople are connected out there far better than marketing typically. They're connected really well out there in the marketplace. If they can answer questions like what I've just said then and bring it back into the organization, they become the voice that makes a massive difference in how the organization creates customer experience and drives pipeline full of prospects that are really well aligned with what you're offering as an organization.
Yeah, really great insight there, Tony. We've still got time for more questions, guys. I think Tony and Lindsay are happy to stay another 5 minutes. So keep them coming in. Really great questions here. I've got one here. We've spent a lot of time on hiring at the beginning, and it keeps coming up as a theme throughout the questioning. So I thought this would be a really interesting one to ask again, both of you. Maybe starting with you, Lindsay. If you had to pick one, this one's come from Ashley. What is the number one characteristic you would look for in a successful salesperson? So I know earlier you mentioned being able to test the authenticity of their answers by mentioning the referees and that sort of thing. But if you had to pick one characteristic that you're looking for successful salespeople, what would that be?
I think it's attitude. It boils down to attitude, and you can get that in their answers. Attitude trumps. In a sense, attitude can trump a skill set, right? Because you can learn new stuff. So if someone's got an attitude and they're really focused on how they can improve themselves, it's a really positive attribute.
And I agree with Lindsay. There's obviously sort of a baseline that people have got to have. So they've got to have a basic level of intelligence, they've got to have a basic level of skills and experience. But then the thing that I think creates difference is very aligned to attitude, but you want people that are naturally inquisitive. they're curious and interested about what goes on in the customer's world and the problems that they've got. So someone with that kind of mindset is going to succeed in a solution selling kind of environment, because they're going to be all about the customer and their world.
Yeah, great feedback, guys. And for what it's worth, my tip here is I always look for authenticity. You know, if they're authentic in who they are as a person, then they're going to evoke that trust naturally in the customers that they're calling into. So look, I've got another question here from Narayanan. I apologise if I haven't pronounced that properly. Wanted to understand what calls can or should sales reps take, and what calls should they not make, be it on services or product-related sales. Is there a standard framework for this, or is it organisationally specific, which needs to be defined? So I'll throw that one to Lindsay.
So, so we're fortunate that we've got what we call a sales development team within our organisation. And what that means is they do two things, right? They qualify those type of inquiries that come in, and then they're also proactive outbound on the phone, trying to capture new clients for us as well. I think it's critical to make sure that you understand what represents a good lead and what is the standard qualification process around that. People, a lot of the time, they talk about BANT, for instance, and you talk about budget, authority, need, and time frame. That's good, but I think it also says if someone's got a budget, they're already looking for something, so it might be a bit limited in terms of what might be the qualification conversation you can have with that particular person. I can't remember the acronym exactly, but there's another one which is called FAINT, and I think it's a bit more applicable because it broadens how you can actually qualify who's actually coming in the door. And FAINT talks about whether they've got the financial capacity, whether they've got the authority to buy, whether there's actually an interest there that can be aligned to a need and a timeline. All right, and I think that allows you to look at, you know, what are active versus what I call also latent opportunities. Sometimes buyers don't know that they have a requirement for something, right? And it's our job as sales professionals to also help them go through that process of self-discovery. So I think, you know, having that definition around a lead and what are particular qualification questions around something like FAINT is really good, because it allows you to broaden that conversation and opportunity for a sale.
And my piece on this is that you know, the problem in selling is we get delegated down to who we sound like. So if we talk about features, functions, product, the conversation's just too low. So salespeople need to be having conversations about business problems, so solving business problems, delivering results, managing risk, and talk the language of numbers. So if the person that's phoned up and wanting to talk to the salesperson isn't capable of having that conversation, that's kind of a self-qualification thing in of itself. So we should be wanting to talk about the business issues that someone faces and the risks. If that person isn't capable of having the conversation, then we don't want to be rude to them or burn anybody ever, but it's a mistake in my view to dash to doing a demo or talking about features and functions of product. We've got to anchor the conversation in what's the problem that they need to solve, what happened inside their organization that makes them think they need to do this, you know, what are the options that they're considering. So we're trying to elevate the kind of conversation as opposed to you know, what type of call. It's really what type of conversation in my mind.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Tony. That just about wraps up the amount of time we've got for questions. But look, guys, if you've got any other questions that you want answered, please feel free to submit them when you complete the exit survey. And I'm sure Tony or Lindsay are happy to answer those for you. But really, thanks a lot for getting involved. Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you very much, Lindsay. As I mentioned, the exit survey, it'll pop up on your screen as you leave. You know, I know Lindsay and Tony, they both talked about the tools that make salespeople successful or help them become successful. Throughout the exit survey, if you complete it, you'll receive a free copy of today's slides. And also, if you like, just let us know and we can set you up with one of those tools for a 30-day trial of GoToWebinar, which we're all accessing right now. We really, really do value your feedback. So please do let us know what you thought of today's webinar and any suggestions you have for future topics via the survey. So thank you, everyone, for attending. And thanks again for your involvement in today's event. We really, really do appreciate it. If you'd like to attend some of our future webinars, visit the site that's just popped up on your screen now. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.